Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. And John, thank you so much for inviting me. Um, I'm the past chairman of the Department of Ocean Engineering at the University of Hawaii. And I've also, at other points in my career, been in the political sphere. I was Ocean Resources Manager for the state of Hawaii, advising the governor and trying to uh, build new industries in Hawaii, including ocean mining. I've also had the privilege of being a lecturer in the law school at the University of Hawaii on resource issues, and go back there every once in a while until I offend them by not being politically correct enough. Because as you might guess, with all kinds of native issues and environmental issues, the University of Hawaii Law School specializes in political correctness. In any case, I am going to describe to you mining on the seafloor, and I'm going to give you an example of the folks who did it right, and I'm going to give you an example of all the folks who have done it wrong. So you're going to get to see the two groups of people here. Now, I'm going to start with fascination for mineral resources on the seafloor, and I am going to give you this quote. In the ocean depths, there are mines of zinc, iron, silver, and gold that would be quite easy to exploit. And you may ask when and who that comes from. And that comes from Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Jules Verne wrote that in 1870. Manganese nodules were actually discovered on land in 1867 in the Swiss Alps by some climbers who couldn't figure out what they were. So Jules Verne knew about these things. And they sort of caught his fascination. Now, Jules Verne is very interesting because he has the greatest track record in the world of future prediction. So from all of the various things that he's promoted as a science fiction writer 135 years ago, almost 60% of them have come true. And that is a greater track record than any psychic and any other futurist the world has ever seen. This guy was amazingly good. So he said in the bottom of the ocean, there are going to be all these mines that are easy to exploit. So manganese nodules were discovered on the ocean floor in 1872. And we have things like this from the 1930s, millions in gold free for the taking from modern mechanics who caught everybody's thought. And in the 1930s, they were going, oh, here we got some equipment there, and this looks really easy to do, and you know, a great fascination with all this sort of stuff. And this sort of carried on, and in the 1950s, you know, people started to explore this in much greater detail. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the resources first so you'll know what we're talking about. And then I'm going to put it in the perspective of some of the law. And I'm going to talk about 4 different resources. Now, these are not the only thing on the ocean floor. You've got corals and sand and gravel and other sorts of things. But I'm going to talk about 4 different things. The first 3 are so far economic failures. And the 4th one, offshore diamonds, is an exquisite success. And so number 4 are the guys who did it right. Number 1, 2, and 3 are the guys who did it wrong. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. Okay, so number 4, the winners. Numbers 1, 2, and 3, the guys who didn't make it. Okay, so we'll talk about these 4 different types of minerals. So number 1, polymetallic sulfides. These are from hydrothermal vents, your black smokers on the seafloor. They're from 1,000 to 2,500 meters, copper, gold, silver, zinc, and a range of other things. You have a company that I will be talking about called Nautilus Minerals, which came very close to mining these things. Was dissolved by the Superior Court of British Columbia about 2 months ago. Okay, number 2 are manganese nodules. So these are down from 3,500 to 5,000 meters. They're not hydrothermal. They're mainly copper and nickel resources. They've also got a bunch of other things. They've also got manganese in them, but the manganese on land is better. They also have cobalt in them, which is quite interesting. Then you have number 3, copper-rich ferromanganese crusts. So manganese nodules are little round things about the size of a golf ball. The crusts are a flat version, essentially. You find these on seamounts from 1,500 meters to 3,000 meters. They're particularly valuable for cobalt, nickel, and platinum. And again, these are very valuable resources. They're in extremely high concentrations. We'll talk about the first 3, and then number 4, the guys who are doing it right. Okay, so the polymetallic sulfides, that's what they look like on the sea floor. They are these hydrothermal vent deposits. The vents are active, but the ones they're talking about mining are usually stopped. You find them all over the seafloor on what they call active spreading ridges, the areas of plates. These are hydrothermal volcanic areas. The Earth is formed of a series of geological plates which expand and collide with each other. And at the places that they're formed and collide, you have some of these vent deposits. Okay, the ferromanganese crusts, they look like this. They're about yay thick, and they're black crustal deposits. Now, when you find them on the seafloor, you're going to have to cut them off the seafloor. Okay, they are attached to the seafloor, but they're right at the surface. Okay, it's right there. It's not. Okay, and that's what they look like. They're basically like pavement in a parking lot, and mining them is like one of those big machines which comes and rips up the pavement of a parking lot, and then you have to repave. So that's kind of what you're looking at. Think of parking lot pavement, and they're about yay thick, about the same thickness as pavement, about the same hardness as asphalt pavement. Manganese nodules are little golf ball sized things. They sit in the mud on the deep sea floor. They form very slowly, and that's what a very good field of them looks like. They're almost touching each other in a high concentration area. The problem with them is they're 20,000 feet down, basically. An individual manganese nodule is worth about 25 cents in the basis of the metals. In order to have an operation which pays for the $1 billion that it's going to set up, you have to mine quite a few of them. The best place for mining these things is what we call the Clarion-Clipperton fracture zone. The bottom of the ocean is covered with these big cracks, and the cracks look, if you get down in a little submarine, it looks like a cliff. It's a couple of 100 feet high, and there are these cracks on the seafloor, and between these 2 cracks is the best field of manganese nodules. So there you have the Hawaiian Islands, here you have Mexico. This is basically between the Hawaiian Islands and Mexico. Okay, now, one of the major arguments made by the deep sea mining folks is that the grades of metals on land are decreasing. And this is the grade of gold going from about 4 grams per ton in the 90s down to about 2 grams per ton now. And this is true for many operations. And the idea here is, well, if this trend continues, this isn't going to look good in another 20 or 30 years. We have 7 billion people on the planet now. They are starting to get wealthier. They are starting to get older. They are starting to demand more resources. What happens when we have 9 or 10 billion people on the planet? Where are all these resources going to come from, particularly as the grades that we're mining on average are going down? Now, this is a graph for gold. The same thing is true for many other resources. So the argument is that there is great environmental advantage to mining on the seafloor. There's no overburden to take on. You don't have to blast, you don't have to dig, you don't have to make any shafts. You have less ore that you need to remove because the grades are so much higher, in some cases 10 times higher. You can also get many metals from the same deposit. Okay, rather than a mine that mines copper on land, at sea the mine is going to mine copper, it's going to mine nickel, it's going to mine cobalt, it's going to mine rare earths, all with the same ore, no overburden, no shafts, no human populations at sea. This looks like a miner's delight. I mean, all your expenses and all your problems are gone. So, I mean, whoa, what more could we ask? Okay. So, this is what applies to the first three kinds of minerals that I talked about: the polymetallic sulfides, the manganese nodules, the manganese crusts. The fourth kind of metal is offshore diamonds, the people who did it right. Offshore diamonds are largely mined off the coast, the southwest coast of Africa. Pictured here, it is one of the mining ships owned by De Beers. They have just commissioned this particular mining ship is called Peace in Africa, and it's their third most recent ship. The reason that they call it Peace in Africa is to contrast their operation with all the blood diamonds that come out of Africa and are anything but peace in Africa. They have developed this incredible technology for mining diamonds offshore, down to about 1,000 meters. And here you see the mining ship. This is a processing plant on the mining ship. This is the oil industry type technology that drops down. There are huge miners that run along the bottom. They pick up gravel. This processing plant processes them all at sea. The diamonds are separated from the gravels by shining light on them. The diamonds fluoresce and are blown off a conveyor belt by air. They are sealed in a can, and every day a helicopter comes, lands here, and takes the sealed can, which has never touched human hands, to De Beers' security operation. So no human hand in this operation ever touches the diamonds. They have developed this over many, many years, this design of a ship, and there are a little more than half a dozen of these. They have laid the keel for a new ship in February based on this design. It's a $500 million mining ship, and it is being built by Damen Shipyard in Romania. Now you will ask, Damen Shipyard in Romania? And the reason is that these people are very low key, and they do not want their technology spread around by a high profile shipyard somewhere else. The Damen Shipyard is a very, very good shipyard. If you go to their website, you'll see all the nice things that they build, not diamond mining vessels, but other vessels are highlighted, and very reputable yard, but very high security and very low key, which is part of the success of this operation, I must say. Okay, so the history of successful mining, the guys who did it right. These are diamonds off South Africa. This began with a drilling guy from Texas by the name of Sam Collins. He actually worked in conjunction with George Bush I, who had developed offshore oil off Texas starting in the 1940s, believe it or not. Anyway, Sam Collins realized the way offshore oil was going in Texas. He realized that he could get some barges, and he could start with small leases off the coast of South Africa. He was actually a treasure seeker and a scuba diver, and worked with airlifts and all this sort of stuff. He developed a successful technology, And he got leases from the government of South Africa, then the government of Namibia, and then later on Angola. He sold out to De Beers. The diamonds are forever people in the 1970s. And De Beers went on, and a few other companies, De Beers aren't the only one, working in South Africa, in Namibia, in Angola, up the coast of Southwest Africa. De Beers developed a fleet of the mining vessels that you just saw. There are 6 or 7 of them working any day off the coast of South Africa there. And as you see, those are big vessels. These are huge operations. They operate on small concessions from the governments of South Africa and Namibia. They are extremely low key. Okay, so they have done everything differently than what I'm going to describe for the other mining guys. If you talk to De Beers, they are very pleasant. They are very low key. They will not answer any questions. If you are very polite, they will send a speaker to your meeting, which I've been in a couple of meetings with their speakers. The first thing they do is no press in the room, no taping, no cameras, no questions to be answered with numbers, and then the guy will put up slides and go through the whole detail of what they do. But it is hard to get them to come and do that. They do give tours of their mining ships, but one tour. Okay, very low key. They don't advertise what they're doing. The collective diamond industry off that coast is bringing in about $3 billion a year. If you look at the figures that they publish, they are incredibly confusing because they categorize what they take off, by concession and by uncut diamonds, and they don't. You get the idea that it's a much smaller operation than it is because of the way they show their numbers. But anyway, it's about a $3 billion operation collectively from a number of companies. They mine on very small concessions from the governments of the 3 countries up there. The diamonds are particularly good because the diamonds coming down the Orange River are very large. And when they cut them, they give you particularly valuable diamonds. They're much larger than the diamonds mined on land for a whole series of geological reasons. Anyway, to give you an example of the way these operate, this is true. There was an environmentalist on a flight, South African Airways, from London to Cape Town. The plane goes over the diamond mining vessels, and this guy looks out the window and sees that there's a huge plume coming off the back of these diamond mining vessels, several miles in length. Guy is horrified, phones up the environmental minister in South Africa and says, "You've allowed this terrible pollution, and what are you going to do about it? And this is an awful situation." So anyway, De Beers finds out about it. They immediately make a call to South African Airways, to the president, and said, "You will please handle this." The president says, "Absolutely, it will be handled immediately." So the South African Airways route is moved so that they never fly over the diamond mining vessels again. All the pilots are instructed that they are to fly over the inland fishing fleet and give a speech about how clean the inland fishing fleet is, how wonderfully they're handling the environment, and what a wonderful thing they've done providing employment for the local people and everything else. That takes place ever since. No South African Airways flight ever flies over the diamond mining vessels again. Problem gone away. De Beers and the mining people have terrific lawyers. They have no public relations people, and they have pretty good engineers. And they're pulling in $3 billion a year. This is the successful model of marine mining. Operate in very close association with the governments, operate on small concessions from these governments, have a very good program doing all kinds of stuff. Okay, by contrast, we will now look at the other three deposits and all of the people who did it wrong. Okay, we're going to start off in the 1950s. Now remember I showed you Jules Verne and all of the marvelous resources that are coming from the deep sea. Well, he finally got the University of California going, and they began their economic analysis of some of these things in the 1950s by a fellow by the name of John Miro. John Miro finished his PhD looking at the economics of manganese nodule mining in 1959. He was so impressed with this that he wrote a popular book published in 1965 called Mineral Resources of the Sea. Then he decided that this was just so incredibly good and was going to solve all of the world's problems that he went around. He was a very convincing fellow. He recently passed away. He went around to all of the big companies he could find, Kennecott, Inco, Getty Oil, US Steel, among others, and basically told them, you know, this deep sea mining stuff is going to wipe your mines on land out of business. We are taking over. We are going to do everything. You better get into this immediately or you're going to be in bad shape. He also went to the United Nations and scared the hell out of every third world country because they were all of their mineral resources on land are going to get wiped out. And he also at the same time scared every environmental group because he kept using the expression, we're going to industrialize the oceans. So here you have they're going to industrialize the oceans. These things are cheaper than sliced bread. We're going to bring up all these minerals. We're going to wipe out the economy of every third world country. And these people all believed him. So anyway, many of these mining companies started major deep sea mining programs starting in the early 1970s. They built mining ships. They went out there and tested. And then you got one other group who got very interested in that, which was the CIA, because it just so happened that a Russian submarine had sunk off Hawaii. It had an explosion on board and sunk, and the Russians couldn't find it. But the US listing equipment out of Pearl Harbor had it located on the bottom very accurately. So they went to Howard Hughes and said, you know, Howard, how about we give you $500 million and we're going to be your partner and we're going to go into deep sea mining. Howard said, wonderful. He had a company called Global Marine, and they said we were going to have another partner, Lockheed Missiles and Space. So Global Marine, Lockheed Missiles and Space, and the CIA with $500 million of CIA money, the largest amount of money that evidently the CIA has ever spent, either before or since, on any individual program. And they all of a sudden start hyping deep sea mining because Howard Hughes is involved. Needless to say, the CIA's real purpose was not revealed. They build this mining ship, which actually is big enough so that it can lift up a Russian submarine and close some doors on the inside and keep the Russian submarine inside undetected while they are supposedly mining for manganese nodules. They obviously built a manganese nodule miner. But all of a sudden you have deep sea mining with this $500 million input. This is looking like really good stuff. All of these major companies are going out and mining. So anyway, part of the problem was this CIA program was so big that it was really hard to keep it secret. So they ended up pulling up the Russian submarine. The Russian submarine broke in half. They only got the first half of it. But anyway, the thing got revealed to the New York Times in 1974. And the New York Times wrote an expose of it, which was denied for many, many years. Subsequently, there's a movie out about this called Project Azorian. And even the movie is a little hard to get. You can find it on the internet. Very well done. But anyway, so this thing, they got as much. There are actually still 3 different stories as to exactly what they got from the Russian submarine, but they got something. But the people didn't realize whether or not this marine mining was really any good, whether the submarine stuff has anything to do with marine mining. There is tremendous confusion, but in the meantime, this $500 million has gone into marine mining, and there are all these mining ships that are actually mining. So anyway, this has a tremendous effect. So this is terrifying third world copper and nickel producers, largely. They go to the law of the sea people. Now, the law of the sea goes back to 1605, to Hugo Grotius, which says, Dutchman, who said, we have freedom of the high seas. And that's the law. By the 1950s, people were realizing that this is not an excellent law. There are some major problems here, and we need a law of the sea. Part 11 of the Law of the Sea Treaty of 1982 dealt with marine mining. Now, the Law of the Sea Treaty didn't actually take effect until enough countries signed, which happened in 1994. The US did not sign, largely because of Part 11, which I will talk about, which is basically that the UN, through its International Seabed Authority, takes hold and runs the deep sea. The deep sea is the stuff outside of 200 miles. Part 11 is very restrictive for reasons that I'll discuss for a company. Part 11, the International Law of the Sea Treaty also says that national countries control out to 200 miles. So basically, any company now interested in deep sea mining is going to deal with a country, deal with the area out to 200 miles in the exclusive economic zone. Nautilus Minerals, which was a Canadian company, went into this, got some leases off Papua New Guinea, and built mining equipment and actually did some test mining, and finally went into basically shut down in 2018 and was dissolved in August of this year. So that's our history of this. The moral of this story is conveyed in the picture here, and basically an entwined legal and policy morass does not foster a new industry. And that is what we have in the case of mining other than diamonds. We also have a problem with the leadership of the proto-marine mining industry. Very poor leadership, and here we have Marine Minerals leadership thinking inside the box. So, okay, here we have a list of the 10 largest mining companies. And I might add that this is from 2018 numbers. So Glencore, BHP, Rio Tinto, couple of Chinese companies, Vale, Anglo-American, Freeport-McMoRan. We might add to that company Glenmont and Barrick, depending. They've recently done acquisitions and might come onto the bottom of this. But anyway, so of these companies, so the only one of these companies that had anything to do with marine mining was Anglo-American, who had a 4% share of Nautilus Minerals. But in 2018, Anglo-American got disgusted and sold their portion at a great loss, and so they weren't having anything to do with marine mining. And that was the end of major company involvement recently in marine mining. Now, previously, in the times of the submarines and the CIA, there had been a lot of company involvement. Okay, now, part of the problem is the International Seabed Authority, or ISA. Now, they released regulations on March the 22nd of this year. And I will note a couple of the regulations. So these regulations ensure that participation in revenues by the authority, the authority is the International Seabed Authority, and transfer of technology to the enterprise. The International Seabed Authority is the regulator here, but it also has a mining arm called the enterprise. So the regulator is also going to be a miner. So that means the guy who controls you and regulates you is also mining. Okay, so participation in revenues by the authority and transfer of technology to the enterprise and developing states. So we're going to transfer revenues from the regulator to the part of the regulation authority that's going to mine as your competitor, and to developing states, as provided for in the convention and the agreement. Okay, the agreement is an add-on clause to the law of the sea treaty. So these regulations issued March the 20th, 2019 shall ensure what I just said. They also shall ensure the protection of developing countries from serious adverse effects on their economy or their export earnings resulting from a reduction in the price of the affected mineral or in the volume of exports of that mineral, to the extent that such reduction is caused by mining in the area. The area means the Clarion Clippers and fractures. Okay, so here you've got the guy who's regulating you is also going to mine as your competitor and is going to transfer funds from you to the person mining as your competitor, plus to developing states who might lose money if you're successful. Yikes! I mean, you know, most companies turned around and said this after having been negotiated for years and years and years and re-released in March of this year. Reads a bit like a Communist Manifesto. Anyway, so as you might guess, of the 10 major mining companies that I have shown previously, none of them have any marine mining program really of any kind. Okay, instead, now we have the situation of Anglo-American, who basically got rid of its little share of Nautilus Minerals. And, you know, I privately talked to one of the Anglo-American guys, and he said, you know, that privately, just between him and me, he wished they would have invested in whiskey and firecrackers instead. So, I mean, that's kind of the company view of it. Privately by one person. That's not I don't think the company published that anywhere. Previous to that, Teck Minerals had a small share of Nautilus as well. But again, they diversified sometime before. So what, if mining companies are not interested in all of these deep sea minerals, what are they focused on? Okay, automation of vehicles. So we see this with trucks being automated, with drilling being automated. They're interested in the Internet of Things. They're interested in connecting all their stuff. They're interested in reducing staff in mines, in data integration, in artificial intelligence. They're interested in electrification of mines, reduction of ventilation, moving from diesel equipment to electrical equipment. They're interested in recycling, in remining of tailings dumps and landfills, incidentally, putting mines deeper. They're interested in new areas in Africa, South America, and Russia. interested in real-time optimization and new processing technologies. If you talk to any of these major mining companies, you'll get something on that list, is where they're focused on. Deep sea, no way. Okay, so just what is the legal regime for this? Well, we have the 1994 Law of the Sea Convention, whose principle is that all this stuff is the common heritage of mankind. They have set up the International Seabed Authority in Kingston, Jamaica. It gives you a territorial sea of 0 to 12 nautical miles, and then an exclusive economic zone out to 200 miles. This is under national jurisdiction. In the US, this is run by the Department of the Interior and leased under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. In the US, and many countries follow this, leases are of two types: competitive, which is typically oil and gas, and non-competitive, which is typically sand and gravel. Competitive lease means that you have a lease sale, and the lease goes to the highest bidder, or you have a non-competitive lease, which is simply a negotiated lease. And you have requirements: a rent on the lease area, a royalty, a bond, and you have to, if it's a competitive lease, you have to have a lease sale agreement, and there's some other requirements. You have environmental requirements covered by the Council on Environmental Quality under the National Environmental Policy Act. And I'm sure you're all quite familiar with that. If you have a non-competitive lease, it looks like this. And basically the Secretary of the Interior can just sign that and fills in the blanks, and it's a very easy, straightforward thing to do. Okay. So for our sulfides, nodules, and crusts, basically we have to locate the resource, look for some of the technology to do that, and develop some mining technology. And the engineers on this sort of stuff have been very good. The problem with marine mining is essentially lawyers, essentially the laws. Okay, for ore extraction, we have bottom crawling vehicles, various types of cutters. We can fragment and lift this stuff, and then we have a various range of processing technologies. This is what some of the wealth of these things looks like. There's a very rich band from some of these sulfides. And it's very important when you understand an ore to realize this means an economic deposit. So the word economic is very impressive there. This is the system of Nautilus Minerals, which I'll talk about. Nautilus Minerals basically had a production ship going down to some mining tools on the bottom. Their mining tools were sort of a three-part mining system on the bottom. This sort of a thing here, which is a bulk cutter, and it runs along the bottom and cuts things up. This is basically a rotating drum cutting it. This is another version of that. You can see the size of these things. Then they had this thing for the arm lifts up here and it'll cut a wall. Brings it up to a mining ship, and then a barge, which transfers it to a processing operation. Okay, this is the mining ship that Nautilus had built. This is the mining vessel in March 2018. Okay, and this is all of Nautilus's deep sea mining equipment in a parking lot in September of 2019. So here you have the various three-part pieces of cutting equipment on the bottom. So these are tested, these work. Okay, so Nautilus Minerals, which was our poster child for mining sulfides at deep sea, bankrupt in 2019. It went to the Superior Court of British Columbia, who in August 2019 liquidated the company and had some considerably disparaging remarks for them. Okay, their share price went from $5 a share to 2 cents a share. One of their investors was the government of Papua New Guinea. Unfortunately, through some arrangements that the government of Papua New Guinea made, they actually took the healthcare budget of the people of Papua New Guinea and took the $157 million out of that, which went into Nautilus Minerals and disappeared. The government of Fiji, on September the 19th of this year, was utterly enraged at the way this was handled. The government of Fiji felt that the government of Papua New Guinea, a fellow Pacific Island state, had been totally duped by Nautilus Minerals, that they had vastly overstated the economic potential involved in this. The government of Fiji called for a 10-year, this is on September 5th of this year, called for a 10-year moratorium on seafloor mining in the Pacific to last from 2020 to 2030, on the basis that the people mining on the deep sea floor could not be trusted. Basically what it amounted to. This was widely accepted in the South Pacific. They got very wide support of this, including from the European Union, who said, you know what, this just isn't ready to go. Okay. With respect to the Clarion-Clipperton zone, we have a whole series of companies with potential leases under the Law of the Sea treaty. We have areas set aside for environmental concerns. But the only leases that actually mining leases that presently exist are to Nautilus Minerals, defunct in the EEZ of Papua New Guinea. The only environmental studies that have been done in terms of EISs have been done some years ago. Every one of these things has considerable technical challenges. These are solvable. This is what it originally looked like from a mining ship running down to a mining machine on the bottom. That's a manganese nodule miner. This is a crust miner. This is a Korean version of this, which has been built, but is again sitting in a parking lot. Another version of what this might look like. This is a German version of the same thing. This is the Nautilus system. Okay. We now have some NGOs and environmental groups really quite concerned about this. And one of them is the Pew Charitable Trusts, who say this on their website. The International Seabed Authority was established to manage mining on the international seabed and to protect the mining environment from its harmful effects. All mining operations, land or sea, cause environmental damage. Research strongly suggests that deep sea mining will result in loss of biodiversity, losses that may be permanent. Then, the Pew Charitable Trusts goes on to cite various environmental disasters caused at sea or by the oil industry. This is the Deepwater Horizon from 2010, which blew out in the Gulf of Mexico, killed 11 people, and put oil all over the Gulf of Mexico. We now have a situation where various sort of recent environmental disasters are being held up as examples of industry having lost its social mandate. So the Deepwater Horizon 2010, 11 dead, oil covers the Gulf of Mexico. The 2019 Brumadinho tailings dam collapsed, 248 dead. This is in Brazil, owned by Vale, one of the 10 major mining companies. The Samarco tailings dam collapsed in November 2015, 19 dead. The village of Bento Rodriguez wiped off the map, tailings destroying the river course all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, again owned by Vale and BHP. So someone came recently and said, well, you know, there are 16 other tailings dams similar to these. What sort of progress has been made on those? Well, I was down in Brazil a week ago, and I asked, of the 16 other tailings dams, how many have been surveyed and repaired? And the answer is none, 0. And I go, well, how about the fines? Well, from the 2015 disaster, 3% of the fines have presently been paid.
Vast areas of the deep Pacific are targeted for seafloor mining, yet these are some of the most poorly explored habitats on the planet. The life of the abyssal seafloor, depths of 5,000 meters or about 3 miles, is weird and wonderful. They're animals with novel adaptations, sailing sea cucumbers, predaceous sponges, yet most of these species have never been collected and are new to science. One of our main project goals is to explore the biodiversity of this region, to understand how they will be impacted by mining activities, and in particular to assess how areas set aside from mining, protected from mining, are adequate to preserve the biodiversity of this vast region. Why do people care about mining in the deep sea floor? Well, it's covered in some areas with black potato-sized structures that are full of valuable minerals, nickel, copper, cobalt, rare earth elements that we need to make cell phones. And the supplies of the minerals in these nodules are enormous, a world supply for many decades of many of these essential metals.
One important element of this project is to evaluate the extent to which communities on seamounts or at shallower depths within each no mining zone can serve as sources of larvae to recolonize communities on the abyssal plain. And so that's one of the important routes for reestablishment of these communities after mining. And so one aspect we've been doing is sampling larvae and also looking at connectivity and species overlap between communities in these distinct habitats.
At depths of 4,000 to 5,000 meters, or about 2 to 3 miles, the deep ocean is extremely difficult to sample. It's a very remote habitat. We're using a variety of state-of-the-art techniques, such as benthic landers and remotely operated vehicles.
A real technological workhorse of our project is the remotely operated vehicle Lu'ukai. This descends to the bottom of the ocean with video cameras and manipulators and collects the animals that we need to study, as well as the sediment samples that contain the diverse microbes.
Among the most numerous and diverse inhabitants of the deep sea are microorganisms, yet they're chronically difficult to study. The approach that we're taking for this project is to study their genetic blueprint in order to better understand some of the ways that they obtain energy and recycled material in the deep sea.
The remotely operated vehicle is a marvelous tool because it allows you to target individual organisms, slurp them up into a chamber undamaged, or pick up sea cucumbers very gently with this manipulator and drop it into a box. We are able to collect all kinds of animals that have never been collected before in this part of the ocean.
Although we're sampling microbes and taking lots of animal samples to look at what is there, what species are there, we're also trying to ask questions about what are the animals and the microbes actually doing in the sediments. And for this we're using seafloor landers, benthic chamber landers, and also what are called microprofiling landers. And these allow us to measure respiration rates, see how much the animals and the microbes are breathing at the seafloor, and also allow us to track how much food they process at the seafloor that we can then compare to other areas and build up an idea of how the ecosystem is functioning.
Baited cameras are a very useful tool to sample the mobile top predators in these ecosystems. So here we have one of the most common animals in the deep sea, a rat-tail fish. They have long, tapering tails that some early scientists thought looked like a rat's tail. At the seamounts, we found swarms of eels, a species that we're not sure of just yet. These are animals that are akin to lions and cheetahs on the plains of Africa. But because these animals, such as rat tails and eels, because they're so mobile, oftentimes they avoid the ROV. So the baited camera system gives us a tool to attract them right in front of our instruments to census them. So often with natural resource management, we end up chasing our tail. The activity starts, and then we come up with a plan for how to manage it and how to conserve the resource. This has happened with fisheries, it's happened with mining on land, and it's very unusual here because these reserves have been set up before the deep sea mining has begun. So we hope through our research to evaluate whether these reserves are adequate preservation areas for the region.
That video was partially funded by the Pew Charitable Trust, again with concerns on the environmental side of marine mining. Okay, so for other than the diamond guys, what is the current situation for marine minerals operations? Well, the ship's going down. And what is the near-term outlook? Dim. Near-term outlook is dim. Okay, there. Most of the employees of Nautilus Minerals did not get looked after. All their stock options got canceled. All their pension plans got canceled. The government of Papua New Guinea lost its healthcare budget, and on and on and on. Okay. What is the longer-term outlook? Well, that's a different story, because here we're going to take a sort of a God's eye view here. So the potential deep sea mineral resources, copper, cobalt, gold, lithium, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, niobium, silver, tellurium, thorium, tantalum, zinc. Good potential. Some of these rare earths that are there in very high degree are critical for new emerging technologies. Solar cells, batteries, super magnets, superconductors, computer chips, super alloys, fuel cells. So many of the high-tech things that are coming on rely on these high-tech minerals, which are in short or difficult supply on land. Many critical minerals have very limited resources. China is the producer of 30 strategic and critical minerals, or levels are declining on land, and you can see the list there. For the United States, the fact that China is producing large numbers of some of these very critical things is an area for concern, at the least, I would say. And it's particularly an area for concern over the coming 20, 30 years. It's not perhaps an area of concern for right now. Now, I wouldn't say that everybody has given up. We have a Belgian mining company called Deme. It has built a couple of miners, has one that's going to be tested in 2020, another for 2023. It's spending $100 million on tests and hopes to have sort of a prototype mining operation ready for nodules by 2027. That's what their latest miner looks like. This is the Deme guy showing the head of the International Seabed Authority what their most recent miner looks like. Deme's a relatively small company. Okay, so what is the long-term outlook? So I've told you the short-term outlook is for deep sea minerals other than diamonds, which have done everything right. So diamonds have done everything right. The guys who have done everything wrong, what is the long-term outlook for them? And the long-term outlook is there's a vast opportunity on the seafloor which will be developed. Okay, the Pacific Ocean alone is greater than the entire Earth's land area. So the land area of the Earth is 29%. The land area of the sea is 71%. Mineral grades are much higher at sea than on land. So I think going back to my first slide that Jules Verne was right. There will be significant mines in the deep sea, but we've got a number of things to straighten out first. So there are a number of very significant legal and environmental problems which are by no means nicely done other than for diamonds. So on that note, I thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Question?
Yeah, so I thought, I wasn't clear. Are you saying that the lack of serious deep sea bed mining is the cause of the ISA, or is that just approximate?
The cause of the ISA is because originally John Merrow scared all the third world mining countries. And they put in this Part 11 of the international, Part 11 of the Law of the Sea Treaty, which was...
No, I get why we have the ISA, but I'm wondering if you think the ISA has contributed to the decline of the industry.
No, I think the ISA is carrying out, as accurately carrying out what it states in the Law of the Sea Treaty. So, I mean, for most Western mining companies, the Law of the Sea Treaty is very problematic. And I think that's, for a Western mining company, that's the basis of the problem. So this goes back to the 1960s. By the way, John Merrow ultimately threw up his hands on all of this stuff, said this law and all these people are utterly hopeless, and became an incredibly successful grower of roses in California, and had one of the largest rose growing farms in California until he passed away very wealthy from growing roses.
Is it Nautilus? an example of the opposite of that, though? Because it wasn't law that brought Nautilus down.
No, it was not law that brought Nautilus down. It was poor funding, and Nautilus was vastly underfunded. The reason that Nautilus was vastly underfunded is because the people who would normally fund this sort of stuff, went marine mining hands off, so that they were getting funding from all kinds of weird little sources. I mean, at the best of times, Nautilus had a reserve of a couple of $100 million for an operation where they needed a few $1 billion. So their problem was poor management and underfunding. Yeah.
It strikes me from the one example of success that occurred in a situation where it seems that they were able to completely capture the local governments to the exclusion and detriment of any other stakeholder.
Well, to the local governments of 3 countries,
Right.
South Africa, Namibia, and Angola.
Right. Your story of the plume shows.
Yeah, well, I think that the story of the plume is more a story of the way that De Beers operates than the fact that the diamond, De Beers does this with, that's not a single example. If you've ever dealt with De Beers, they are very pleasant, but you don't want to meet them in a back alley.
Yeah. And so I wonder too if that's, thinking about other contexts and other countries, if you're operating within one country's EEZ.
If you're operating within one country's EEZ, you need to work closely with the government. You need to set up programs to have societal buy-in. I mean, you've got a strong societal mandate for mining both onshore and offshore in South Africa and in Namibia and in Angola a little less so. But you've got strong societal buy-in, in part because they provide jobs, they provide training, they provide social programs. They've done all the right stuff.
And from my most recent kind of experience is fisheries management in the United States. So recognizing that in the U.S. you have strong fishing stakeholders who exist and are influential in some way. So then my question is really to the extent that ocean mapping and ocean zoning is going to be crucial.
Going to be
able
crucial.
to parcel that
Yeah.
out. And
You've got to have strong societal buy-in. Now, do I think all the NGOs in South Africa think highly of De Beers? I doubt it. But they still, in spite of that, they have done much that is right, and they do have a strong societal mandate, which Nautilus certainly doesn't have in the Pacific and in Papua New Guinea in particular. Yeah.
Since the U.S. is not a signatory to the Law of the Seas Convention, does that mean that ISA has no, authority over the U.S. if we decided to?
This is something that Dr. Schmidt brought up. There's something that was signed in the mid-1980s called the Reciprocating States Agreement. And the Reciprocating States Agreement says that a country, and there are half a dozen signatories to this Reciprocating States Agreement, may issue leases under its own national jurisdiction, which will be respected by all of the other signatories of this Reciprocal States Agreement. Now, the U.S. has signed that. I don't believe it has been revoked. The International Seabed Authority says it will honor the leases signed under the Reciprocating States Agreement. Now, it just so happens that there are no U.S. companies at the moment who want to carry forward with leases that were originally put forward under that agreement. However, Lockheed Missiles and Space, with their holdover from the $500 million from the CIA, does have one of those leases, has reassigned that lease to Lockheed UK. The United Kingdom is a signatory to the Law of the Sea Agreement. That original lease under the Reciprocating States Agreement, now assigned to Lockheed UK, a signatory under the Law of the Sea, is being recognized by the International Seabed Authority.
So what What U.S. governmental body would regulate it?
It was, up to this point, it has been, well, there's a turf war between NOAA and the U.S. Department of the Interior. So originally NOAA controlled the arrangement, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration controlled the administration of the Reciprocal States Agreement. Now, NOAA closed down its ocean mining office, which was also its ocean energy office, and nominally sent things over to the U.S. Department of the Interior to be managed by the Minerals Management Service. Now, the Minerals Management Service got closed down and was replaced by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. But the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management is interested in energy and is not really set up to manage minerals. And everybody has said, well, the law says NOAA is supposed to do this anyway. And NOAA said, well, maybe. So you have a policy vacuum in Washington, I guess.
There's an activity vacuum.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So once you get some activity, you'll have.
Right.
What is a plume, John?
A plume is
No, the plume that De Beers was creating. That's just.
it's just sediment. It's just
It's a
sediment.
waste gravel, right?
Right. It's a waste gravel. Exactly.
Well, and some of it's fine enough that.
A lot of it is quite fine.
But it's as if the river was being reactivated.
Exactly right.
So it's not a pollution plume.
No. But it's a 4 mile long brown river which looks bad from an airplane.
Yeah.
John, are there any active mining operations within the Clarion Clipperton zone?
No. And until they finalize the regulations which I showed that were put forward on March the 22nd of this year have not been finalized. You may still comment on those regulations, and until those regulations are finalized, the International Seabed Authority cannot issue a mining lease. Now, they can issue exploration leases, and there are a whole bunch of exploration leases.
But the revenue sharing and.
Oh, yeah, that
discourages most of it. Anybody that.
Well, and they reiterated on March the 22nd that this will be what happens. So, and in fact, let me just go into that. It's actually worse than I described, okay? So you get your lease from the International Seabed Authority, who is going to regulate you. When you get your lease, you actually have to pick out 2 equal parcels. Okay, and then the International Seabed Authority decides which one you get. The other one, they transfer to the Enterprise, which is their mining arm. So you have to do all the exploration and pick out a piece of land for your competitor. Then you have to transfer your technology to your competitor, the Enterprise, at a price that they think is fair. Okay, so you've picked out. Yeah.
I want that deal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is a good deal. So you've picked out a mining site, surveyed it all out. You've developed technology. Now you have to transfer that to the person who's going to regulate you. But the second half in the back room of them is also going to be a mining company to mine as your competitor. Now, if you and the competitor are very successful and generate money and sell lots of stuff, they then can take that money and give it to a third world country who you've deprived of resources. Okay, so not only do you have to pay for your competitor, but you have to pay for third world land guys who lost out. Not only that, they can actually transfer money from or increase your fees and take that money and transfer it to the Enterprise, lest the Enterprise mine in a way which is not efficient and lose money. So that they can subsidize the Enterprise with your money, and they can actually pay consultants and subsidize other things. So it's it actually reads worse than the Communist Manifesto. But anyway, so as you might guess, the international mining industry does not think highly of the system. Yeah. One more.
So it seems like the ISA is rightfully concerned with furthering economic instability in these developing countries. But I guess how do you propose that deep sea mining could be conducted in a way that wouldn't further instability, because for a lot of people, it may seem that the gain of a private company might not outweigh furthering instability in these countries, where a country may have to go intervene if, instability creates things, civil wars, genocide, etc. So I guess, how do you propose that deep sea mining could be conducted in a way?
Well, I mean, the United Nations could turn around and say, you know what, with this stuff, we've made a mistake. They already renegotiated part of this, which is called an agreement, and watered things down a little bit. They could turn around and say, you know what, this isn't going to work. No one is going to mine here. We need these resources, and we could renegotiate a reasonable deal that would allow international mining companies to look at this. I mean, when you've got every major international mining company in the world that says, we should have invested in whiskey and firecrackers instead of this, I mean, you're doing something wrong, right?